Hey guys, welcome to another exciting day of World Civilizations! Yay! Okay, oops. Let's go to the right one. Done. Bam. Okay, so, today we're looking at life during the Cold War, specifically North America and Western Europe. So really think of it as kind of like a snapshot of the whole Cold War, North America, Western Europe. So really we're looking at the countries that would have been involved in NATO. Here are essential questions for today. Number one, how did Western Europe recover from World War II? What was the effect of the Marshall Plan on the economies of Western Europe during the late 1940s and early 1950s? What social and political issues challenged the United States during the Cold War? And how did Western society change during the Cold War? So we're going to look at Europe first. So first off, we have this thing called the Marshall Plan. Your assignment today is going to be on it, and it'll go in more detail about it. But the Marshall Plan is essentially a United States program to help Europe recover, right, from the war. So it provided aid to Western Europe following the devastation of World War II. This included things like sending food to them, sending money to get their economies back up on the way. It's actually really great for a lot of investors in the United States to invest in European companies. And really, it's just going to affect the Western countries. The countries in the East, the Soviet Union, will have their own kind of plan for that. We're going to see lots of rapid recovery. So aid from the Marshall Plan is going to really help Western Europe after World War II. By 1950, industrial production was 30% above pre-war levels. So before World War II, right, it was pretty good. But now after World War II, with the Marshall Plan, it's 30% better than it was before the war. And that recovery and that growth will last into the 1960s, and then it kind of plateaus out, and 80s will go down a little bit too, but we'll get there. But yeah, it's incredible how much it grows and how much the Marshall Plan helps their economies. In France, Charles de Gaulle is a war hero, and he is going to dominate French politics until a socialist government will gain power after he retires in 1969. So after 1969, we're going to see a lot more socialism in France. This is a picture of Charles de Gaulle. West Germany, so we've talked about East and West Germany before, but West Germany, with the Marshall Plan, with the help, with that money, they're going to experience really low unemployment and high production until the 1960s, the mid-1960s. And part of the reason for the Marshall Plan too was because the Americans realized that part of the reason that World War II started was because of all the crazy war reparations that we were putting on the Germans after World War I. And so they're like, you know what, no, we're not going to make them pay, we're going to help them, right? And so we start to see car companies especially start coming up, right? Our VW, Volkswagen Beetles, start getting, produced, lots of those. And this other one, I think, might be the precursor to Audi. I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong. But it's a German advertisement for a car, so it's pretty cool, right? I think it looks pretty sweet. The red one, I would drive that. I would totally drive that. So, in Britain, they're going to create a welfare state after the war. So, and how they're able to afford that kind of stuff is, Britain's going to go through a whole economic revolution thing. They're going to start to kind of dismantle the whole British Empire, let a lot of their colonies become independent, right? Stuff like that. And it's really going to impact their economy. And they're going to start to implement things like healthcare, stuff that's like Social Security, stuff like that. this is, oh, I did skip it. That was weird. The EEC is the European Economic Community. So a lot of these countries wanted to be united. Led to the Rome Treaty, which created the EEC. Essentially, it's an agreement between a lot of different countries that said that, hey, we're not going to impose tariffs on other countries' goods. Essentially, saying a tariff is a tax on a good. So if you have something coming in from another country, you tax it. So essentially, they're like, we're going to open our borders to be able to trade for free, essentially, for a lot cheaper. So these are the countries that are involved. So the orange ones are the original ones. The green is by 1973. Right, it goes on. And this kind of leads, like, this idea will lead to the European Union. So don't write all this down, right? Just know that, hey, the EEC leads to the European Union, right? So this says, the destruction in Europe during World War II allowed far-thinking and innovating statesmen to envision a stronger, more vibrant Europe, freed of much of the old world thinking that dominated before the war. They proposed a united Europe, something that had never happened in its history of divided states. In the 1920s, a pan-Europe movement began after being proposed by philosophers and thinkers for generations. Small groups lobbied for uniting Europe as a way to prevent another war. After that failed, broad support for establishing Europe as a buffer between the Soviet Union and the United States arose from both the left and the right. The British called for a union between Britain and France, and Winston Churchill proposed a Council of Europe. Negotiations between France, England, and West Germany to assist German industrialization led to economic agreements that grew into the Schuman Plan, named after a French foreign minister. This plan evolved into the European Defense Community, the European Economic Community, and the European Atomic Community. These were united into the European Community, or EC, in 1967, which became the European Union, or EU, in 1992. And of course, in more recent history, Great Britain has left the European Union. This was their flag. So each star was for a different country in the European Union, but now it's not accurate because there should be one less star because Great Britain left. Canadian economy actually boomed after the war. They're going to start building lots more electronics, aircraft, nuclear, and chemical engineering. Canada creates a welfare state with nationalized pension and health programs, right? Which is like, whenever people talk about Canada, it's like, oh, maple syrup and healthcare, right? So, right, this is where the healthcare actually starts being a thing. There also is a really big movement for a more united Canada. So for a long time, English was the only official language in Canada, but the French in Eastern Canada, in like Quebec and stuff, they wanted to become their own country, and there was like a lot of threat of like a civil war going on. But instead, the government of Canada decided it'd be better to just make French also one of the languages. So last summer, my husband and I took my brother, who's right now a senior in high school, on a senior trip to Canada, and we drove. And so, we get up to the border, and, you enter a national park, you enter the border, and they're always like, bonjour, hello. They say both. And I was like, oh, that's so cute. And now I'm like, oh, it's so the French speakers didn't, revolt. Cool. Anyway. Here's those essential questions again. So how did Western Europe recover from World War II? Part of it's going to be investors from the United States. Part of it's going to be the Marshall Plan. Number 2, what was the effect of the Marshall Plan on the economies of Western Europe during the late 1940s and early 1950s? Does a great job, right? Like, their economies are pretty good in the 50s. It's like growing their economies. So, post-war United States. So our post-war economy So we're looking at a lot of things that kind of stem from FDR, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. It's really going to continue to guide U.S. policies, and we're going to see lots of booming in our economy. The other day we looked at the Red Scare, right? So in the early 1950s, we're seeing the Red Scare, fear of communist infiltration, McCarthyism, all that kind of stuff. We're going to see in the 1960s lots of civil rights movements, so many civil rights movements. A lot of times we only focus on the African American civil rights movement, but there was also so many other ones, like the Chicano movement, which was for like Mexican Americans. There's like a lot of civil rights movements for like equal pay, like all sorts of like really, really cool things. There's a women's rights movement, there's LGBT movements, lots of movements that are technically civil rights movements, but in this case, right, specifically they're talking about like the Martin Luther King Jr. African American civil rights movement. President John F. Kennedy will also be elected in the 1960s, as well as assassinated. We're going to see a lot of race riots. I mean, lots of cities are being like bombed in different parts of the cities. We'll also see lots of anti-war protests. And I mean, everything from hippies to students, I mean, just life's crazy, right? In the 1960s, in the 70s. Western society as a whole, so that includes Western Europe and US and Canada, we're going to see a rise in the middle class. And with that, right, so we have a lot less people in poverty, a lot more people have money, and a lot more people are gonna be moving to cities. We're going to see lots of prosperity with the economy. It's going to be really easy to take out like lines of credit. That's going to help fuel this consumer society, right? So where we have lots of people who are buying lots of things. And with the consumer society, we always see lots of advertisements. And man, do I love 1950s advertising. I think it's so funny in the 50s and 60s. There's a archive.org, you can like look up like little film clips of different advertisements that would have been on like TV, or they have ones that would have been on the radio, some that would have been in magazines and stuff. Can we just talk about this Tide one though? I mean, look at this. Like, I just love how she's looking at that box of Tide. I'm like, oof, if she knew that Tide Pods would be a thing, it's just so funny. It looks like it's like hypnotizing her with like those, like the spiral, right? Tide, oceans of suds, no soap, no other suds, no washing product known will get your wash as clean as Tide. And also by the lady like that's like holding that, that's like an old-timey washing machine. Super crazy. They're like hanging their clothes out on the clothesline because dryers aren't mainstream yet. So world's cleanest wash, in love with that wonderful Tide. This other one is a gas range, which is a gas stove. Pretty awesome. And the link that's up above is to a advertisement for Tang. If you guys don't know what Tang is, go talk to your parents or Google it or something like that. But Tang's like it's kind of like Kool-Aid. Kind of. It's like a powder that you like mix together, and they're like, it's better than orange juice. It's kind of like closer like Sunny D, I would say, if you've never tried it. Women in the post-war world. So we're going to see lots of changes in marriage, divorce, and family size, and other like significant changes. in like women's roles in like the family and society after World War II. Part of that's, you know, I mean, we had a lot of women who were working factory jobs and stuff, and they're like, we can do this, right? Like, we can work these jobs. We're able to work these jobs. We're going to see women's liberation movements in the 1970s specifically, to try and say, like, yeah, let women work in these different fields. You know, they can do it, that kind of thing. One thing that will really push it is there's a book by Betty Friedan called The Feminine Mystique, and that really, like, inspires a lot of people and really gets, like, that movement going. This is women's suffrage, which is women's right to vote based off of different countries. So it says at the bottom, this chart lists the year in which some women earned voting rights in various countries. Note that in some of these countries, women were allowed to vote in certain local elections before the right to vote was extended to women voting in all of the country's elections. For example, the United States, women could vote in territorial elections in Wyoming as early as 1869. And then Utah actually comes like right after them. But kind of interesting. Students, right? So this is like mostly college students, but we will see some high school students. Student revolts. So we have lots of university students protesting the Vietnam War, and university students in Europe protesting societal problems. The Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District. So that's a Supreme Court case about these two kids and the boy's friend. So these are the Tinker siblings. So I believe the boy was in high school. I think the girl was in junior high. But they wanted to protest the Vietnam War, but they wanted to do it in like a peaceful way. So so they decided to wear these armbands with peace signs to school. So the dress code didn't say anything about armbands, you know, they're like, okay, we're good. So yeah, they'd been planning this, and they're gonna wear these peace signs on their clothing to school. Well, the school district heard that they were gonna do this, right? And the school district changed the dress code like right before they did it, right? Saying, hey, you can't wear armbands, you can't whatever. Well, they do it anyway, and it goes to the Supreme Court because it's like, as students, as high school students, do you have the right to protest something, right? To petition the government? Do you have the right to, you know, is your freedom of speech in that aspect, like, protected? And Supreme Court said yes, as long as... so if the school and school district had that dress code from the beginning of the school year, you know, it would have been a no-go, right? Sorry, my dog's all messing with me. But because the school district had changed it, like, right before they did it, it wasn't cool. All right, so make sure... Oh, my goodness. Make sure you get those... Hey, are you chill? Be chill. Make sure you get those. Make sure you do your assignments. We do have a test coming up. I do have the study guide up and ready to go. If you need help finding that, let me know. And I will see you guys later.